Hello, everyone. So this is a case study, I would say, and an invitation for you to let me know your thoughts about this because we have an interesting situation going on this year with the lunar nodes, Rahu and Ketu, the north and south node of the moon. That is that you always have two calculations. You need to look at the mean calculation, which takes a mean average calculation across the board and says that the nodes are always retrograde, as traditionally in Indian astrology, they are seen as always going against the grain, always going against the norm. So they must be retrograde always. But then you also have this true node calculation, quote unquote, where it's this more specific calculation of how there's a wobble in their orbits and how we can actually see them at times, even stationed direct. And especially coming up to an eclipse and around the eclipse period, we can see this more so. And what we have going on this year is that the true node calculation is at 0 degrees of Aries and Libra. And because of the eclipses recently, and we're in the middle of eclipses now, I'm recording this on October 24th. So we're coming up to the second eclipse. And so we have them stationed at this very first degree of the cardinal signs, sidereal, Aries, and Libra. So what we have going on is a whole month of a difference between both calculations, because by October 30th, the mean node calculation means that they move signs, Rahu into Pisces, Ketu into Virgo. But according to the true node calculation, they don't move signs until November 29th. So from October 30th to November 29th, that's quite a big difference. So that's my invitation to you. This is an opportunity for all of us to observe in our own lives. Do we notice the shift? Apart from what we might see on our TV screens or on our screens and what's going on in the world, what is going on in our own life? How is this affecting our life in terms of the signs that are impacted here? Can we notice a shift from Aries Libra to Pisces Virgo in November? And if we can notice that shift of the nodes, does that mean that the mean node calculation is, quote unquote, a truer calculation, more applicable to our lives in general? Many astrologers use the true node for transits, and then also use the mean node for chart calculations or natal readings. I am one of those. I tend to, because the thing is, the nodes are already really confusing. So instead of just confusing someone all the more, because they're shadows, they're unconscious parts of our being. So if you do a reading for someone and then you're telling them, well, actually, they're on the cusp of a sign, so it could be in this sign, but it could be in this sign. It's already confusing as hell for them. So for personal readings, there's just no point going down that road. As people get more advanced in astrology, that's something then you can study and say, okay, let's be open-minded about this and say, if I use the true node and they move signs, is this more true for me, the experience of the nodes in these other signs, or vice versa with the mean node if they change with the mean node? There isn't ever that much of a difference. It's only up to a degree and a half at most. But the thing is, because again, of the fact that Rahu and Ketu are at the 0 degree of Aries Libra mark, it means that this whole difference of 1 degree between the two calculations makes all the difference. And again, this happens sometimes in people's charts where it will actually change signs. But we're all getting to experience it together now in November. So again, remember, I'm just reminding you that on October 30th, the mean node calculation, let me just show you it so you can have a visual. November 30th, the mean node calculation, you can see here, move into Pisces and Virgo. But that doesn't happen until the 29th of November with the true node. So we've got this whole month of November, therefore, to see, can we notice the shift of nodes, Rahu into Pisces, Ketu into Virgo, depending on what these are for you. So with that in mind, I thought I would go through each of the signs and take a look at how this might potentially play out. So let's start with Aries. And Aries, of course, has been experiencing Rahu in their sign for the last year and a half, and therefore Ketu in the seventh sign. So it has meant that Aries have felt more of this kind of exaggerated sense of self and possibly also a distorted sense of self. Maybe Aries individuals have been having to take on more roles, wear more masks in some way, put on a show, whatever, in whatever capacity, to feel like they're like playing this role or they were playing this role and now they're playing this other role. That could be something that Aries have been experiencing throughout this whole period. Because it rules the 11th sign for Aries, which is all about ambition, there could be a lot of ambition to deal with here and a lot of ambition to see through for sure. Rahu can certainly bring a great deal for Aries of success. The thing is with Rahu, though, is that no matter what you get, as the myth goes, no matter what you get, you're always going to feel like an imposter. And then also, whatever you get, there's always a price to pay. Because anything that you ever try to do in life that you haven't done before, you're initially going to feel like an imposter anyway. That's for everybody. And then also there's that price to pay. So you get the promotion, you get that whatever win in some way, but then you have to put in extra hours because of that promotion or whatever. So I think that that's important for Aries to have acknowledged in the last year and a half, that push for something, that ambition, and to see now in November. So this is the question for you, Aries. In November, do you notice the shift from your first sign to your 12th sign, Rahu into your 12th sign? In other words, do you notice a shift from you to this need to let go more, this need to actually experience this? Okay, I've tried all of that and, it's brought me many successes, but, I'm ready to give that up now. I'm not so much interested in that anymore. Now, again, somebody has to be very conscious of this, which is not always the case because the nodes are mostly unconscious. They are shadows after all. They're eclipses. So it's something I'm asking you to be mindful of and to report back to me, please, because I would love to hear back from you and for all the signs and how this is playing out for you. If you notice a shift, and we can do it like a case study. So Rahu moving into the 12th house for Aries, do you notice that shift? Practically, it might be a shift in terms of maybe your expenses start increasing. Do you notice that in November? And to report back on that, maybe you notice more downtime or a need for downtime or a need to retreat more, to go off on retreat or to go on a really long distance foreign trip that is not just a holiday, it's more like a retreat, a pilgrimage. Just notice these things. Maybe there's some loss of friendship. Maybe there's a loss of some sort of associations that you had with some group or some other, maybe some network that you're kind of not so interested in anymore on some level, or it seems like they're not interested in you, but on some level, maybe you're orchestrating it. So that's the node, Rahu into your 12th house. So that's for Aries. Let's go forward with the next one. That's Taurus. So for Taurus, it's shifting from the 12th house. So in this case, whereas Aries are about to experience this more letting go more and, you know, be mindful of expenditure and all of that, but, a good time for letting go for Aries for the next year and a half. For Taurus, they've been doing that for the last year and a half. They're probably done with that. They're probably enough of me letting go and spending all this money on this X, Y, or Z. Now it's actually going into your 11th house. And notice in November, if you notice that shift, if you notice the need for earning more, if you focus on that more, if something happens in the area of your life more, if something happens in your network, in your friend circle, in your ambitions, in your goals in life, do they start shifting somewhat? These are a few questions to ask if you've got Taurus, rising or moon sign. I mean, I think it's good just for this exercise, this case study, to just keep it at rising sign to be more objective about it, because once we add in the moon, then it's not as objective and it's sometimes hard to tell. But if we just keep an eye on the rising sign only, so that's for Taurus. The shift from expenditure, losses, endings to ambitions, goals, friends, networks, gains of all kinds. That's the shift that's going on. And it's happening. But again, I'm just asking you whether you notice it in November. For Gemini, the shift is happening from the 11th sign, which I just mentioned. For Taurus is the beginning of the 11th, which is all about ambition and goals. And so for Gemini in the last year and a half, perhaps you've been feeling this and a culmination of this. And by the way, the culmination point of the eclipse of October 28th is another part of this story, that it's this big ambition that's been finally sort of come to a fruition, come to a resolution also during that whole eclipse period. But now it's shifting into the 10th house. And so in both cases, Rahu is very well placed by all means, because 11th house is ambition and Rahu is all about ambition. So that's all good. 10th house is also about work and ambition. And Rahu in the 10th house also does good for that reason. But just notice, do you feel the shift in terms of not so much about what you want to get out of what you're doing, but more focusing on what you're doing precisely? So Rahu in the 10th house is the shift. Do you notice the shift, Gemini, rising Gemini? Do you notice it in November? That's the question. For Cancer, and now you can see how, as I move it forward, you can see that it's shifted now back. But anyway, let's just focus on where it has been the last year and a half for Cancer. It's been in the 10th house of work and action and changes that have most likely happened in your work life, Cancer, for the last year and a half, I would say. But notice if you see the shift in November into the 9th house, Rahu in the 9th house is very different to Rahu in the 10th house, and more different to Rahu in the 10th house shifting from the 11th house, much more. So as Rahu moves from the 10th to the 9th house is very much about wanting to do something more meaningful. And if what you've been doing though thus far and what you've been gaining from what you've been doing and all this ambition you've been focused on in recent years, if all of that has not been satisfying in a more meaningful way, then therefore the shift in November through November and for the next year and a half, Cancer, is all about the shift into something more meaningful and purposeful in your life. So notice that if you can see it in November, can you notice that shift? Maybe it involves travel. Maybe it involves going back to school. Maybe it involves studying some higher philosophical, spiritual something. Maybe it involves finding a teacher or someone who can advise you. Maybe it just involves doing some more spiritual work on yourself and just thinking deeply about things. These are the things to think about for the next year and a half. But again, notice it if you notice the shift in November, and please let me know. So next one is Leo. The shift is from the 9th house I just mentioned that Cancer are just beginning into the 8th house. This is also, I think, quite a more extreme change in many ways. The 9th house, for the last year and a half, you might have noticed changes in your philosophy, in your beliefs. You might have taken up that study. You might have traveled. You might have done something mind-altering, mind-expanding in the 9th house. But now it's going into the 8th house and it's time to make some changes. And it might not be very obvious to you that you're in any way orchestrating what's about to happen, because the 8th house is hidden. And the 8th house, Rahu, is more hidden because Rahu is hidden. So Rahu in the 8th house can show unexpected changes. But again, noticing that you're on some level creating these changes or needing these changes, wanting this change. But I just feel like it's coming out of the blue also. So it might be harder for you, Leo, than other signs, I would say, to be very mindful of that shift that happens in November or into the end of November, however we calculate it. But I would say just keep an open mind and see if something does happen and get back to me. So that's Leo. Just be open to change. And don't, by the way, Leo, think that change is a bad thing. Could be a positive change. And hopefully it will be for you. So for Virgo, then, this is shifting from the 8th house. For the last year and a half, Rahu has been moving through the house of change, hidden dynamics changing. And even if something hasn't obviously changed in your life in any outward obvious way, Virgo, the last year and a half would have been a very changeable time for you. And you're probably going through a lot of deep inner change, even if you never did anything differently outwardly. So what that changes to, though, is Rahu moves into your 7th house. And this might be a bit more of an obvious shift because as soon as Rahu and Ketu moves into your first sign, of course, they're always two sides of the same coin. Ketu in your first house, Rahu in your 7th house. For Virgo, this is going to be really much in your face. This is like change that has to happen right now. And because it's more immediate, 1st and 7th house, So this is going to change how you relate to other people, and your relationships are going to change, and your partner or partners are going to change, whether it's business, personal, romantic relationships, whatever it is. There's going to be a lot of change going on in your relationships, all kinds of relationships. So notice if you start to see the shift in November in those relationships, is what I would say. And again, report back to me. I would love to hear it. Have you noticed the shift in November? So the next one then is Libra. Libra, they have been in your first and seventh house, as Virgo is about to experience now. You've had this for a year and a half of this big changes that have been happening in your relationship. And it could have been that, you've been going through personal change, obviously, but it could have been that, because of your partner going through so much change themselves. And so the focus might have been so much on the partner with Rahu in the seventh and not so much on you, and you going through all of these changes together, of course. But now it's shifting into more hidden aspects, with Ketu moving into the 12th and Rahu moving into the 6th into Pisces, which for Libra, this is the one sign where this is quite a juxtaposed position in a way, because you've got Pisces in the 6th house and Virgo in the 12th house, and they seem sort of opposite their nature, because they are essentially, because Virgo is very much like the 6th house, and it's all about order and everyday things to, get right. But the 12th house is about letting go of all of that detail. And now Ketu moving in there, obviously, is going to show that need. And on the other side, then you have Rahu moving into the 6th house, which is, again, normally about order, but it's Pisces. And it's Rahu in Pisces, and Rahu and Neptune in Pisces, for that matter. So Libra, this could be, a bit confusing about what you're meant to be doing. And in terms of your just day-to-day life, even, it could be a bit confusing about what you're meant to be doing in your day-to-day routines. And think about that, and think about, has that started to shift in November? So the next sign is Scorpio. And of course, Scorpio in the last year and a half have been dealing with this day-to-day life and, getting the balance right between doing what they need to do, 6th house, and letting go in the 12th house, and resting and recuperating in the 12th house. And they might not have got that balance right. It's hard to get the balance right with the nodes. So Rahu in the 6th house might have exaggerated all the problems of everyday life, health issues even, certainly at least kind of just routines that they haven't really got on with, maybe there's been a disturbance there, because not only do we have Rahu in Aries, we've had Uranus in Aries. So Scorpio, you've been dealing with Uranus since 2016 in Aries in your routines. So now that Rahu's moving into your 5th house, Ketu into your 11th, notice if you, and again, I'm focusing more on Rahu here because, of course, Rahu is what we would notice more generally, and Ketu less. We tend to sort of not focus on the Ketu part of our chart of our lives, and more so on Rahu, because that's what we want generally. Again, even if we don't consciously want it. But Rahu in the 5th house can be more fun, for sure. And I think if Scorpio, you can be open-minded to this in November and see if you can notice the shift in November to something that's just a little more lighthearted and more fun. But the 5th house is more than fun, though. I don't want to just downplay it, because it is also about spiritual practice and deep devotion. So I think that Rahu here can obviously shake this up in a way, especially conjunct Neptune. But I think that there could be a lot more emphasis and focus on spiritual practices, on fun, on enjoyment, on love, on creativity, on your children, if you have children. And notice if you see any shifts around that, around these people, or, have changes started to happen for your children in November, things like this. So that's Scorpio. For Sagittarius, you've been going through this 5th and 11th house, focusing more so on the 5th house, of course, with Rahu in the last year and a half. So really focusing on what you want, on wanting fun, on wanting to experience some joy in life. Who doesn't want that, right? But Rahu in the 5th house, of course, can also paradoxically, tragically, you might say, also block that, because we tend to obsess about where Rahu is. So Rahu in the 5th house for the last year and a half, Sagittarius, you might have felt that, but now it's moving into your 4th house, and it's about happiness and home. And the changes that are likely to happen are around home and work, because of course, they're opposite each other, 4th and 10th house. So thinking about this in terms of, what makes you happy and where would you be happy, even geographically. This is about home. This is place. This is being rooted. And Rahu in the 4th house, Pisces, with Neptune, can obviously maybe scatter you somewhat, might make changes in your home environment. And again, the question I'm putting to you is, Sagittarius rising, do you notice a shift in November? Do you notice a change in November around the home life, more especially? For Capricorn, of course, you have been going through the major changes in home life with Rahu in your fourth house for the last year and a half. So this could have also made lots of changes in your work as well, because obviously if you move home, that can change work or routines, at least at home and work, getting the balance right. And again, it's really hard to get the balance right with the nodes. And like, for example, if you do change home or things change at home, like routine kind of goes out the window when you move house, for example. So it's very hard to keep a balance. And that's what has been the challenge probably for you. Now it's shifting into the third and ninth. It's really more about travel. It's more about thinking and studying and interacting more and playing more, also possibly creating more. If you're in any way creative, this could be a time to really focus on that. In any way, dealing with other people, wanting to travel, especially, is another one with third house. Dealing with siblings, neighbors, these kinds of things. These third house activations are there with Rahu. So notice again, even if you don't have anything personally that you could say, I can't see any changes in my life. Notice, have changes happened for your siblings? Have any changes happened for neighbors, people in your locality? That's third house. So next one, we have Aquarius, because Aquarius have been dealing with this, neighbors changing, siblings, all of these people changing, traveling, thinking, writing, publishing, maybe even. That's third, ninth house. Some of these themes might have come up in a big way for Rahu in the third house. And how do you express yourself? You know, this has been a big theme for you in the last year and a half. Now it's shifting in the second sign and Ketu in the eighth. This is like home or family issues. This is more like money issues, family issues, things that are important to you and things that are important to your partner, including their home or family, their money, their family's money as well, values, what's important to you, what's important to them. And it's not just a partner or romantic partner. It could be a business partner and shared wealth. It could be any other, what's important to me, what's important to you. There's always this kind of balancing out mine and ours, or mine and yours. So notice if you see a shift in November with any kind of issues around mine, me, mine. With Rahu in the second house, there could be a lot of focus on wanting to increase wealth, wanting to focus on money more, making money, you know, focus on what's important to me, you know, so there might be a big shift there. Or you might, again, more objectively see it in your family life. I keep saying home, but I just relate home to family, of course, but it's not specifically home as in your home. It's actually more family and extended family. So there might be some change that comes up in your family dynamics. So just notice that in November. Do you see any changes in November? And then finally, Pisces, where Rahu is about to move in and Ketu opposite. Of course, you've been having all of the changes going on in your finances and your family dynamics for the last year and a half, with Rahu in your second, Ketu in your eighth. Now it's coming into your first and Ketu opposite. This is going to be very much in your face. If you weren't aware of what's going on before, you're aware of the changes that have to happen now. Rahu in your first house is going to make some big changes for you personally. Like, even again, because I'm talking about rising sign, even physically, you might physically go through a lot of physical changes in the next year and a half. You might make some drastic changes, you might look very different in a year and a half from now. But apart from that, it's more about who you are, your sense of self, and how that impacts other people. How you relate to other people is going to change as well. So this is a more obvious one, just as it is with Virgo, because when the nodes are in your first and seventh, it's like immediate. It's like in the present moment. These are changes that are happening to me and in my life, in my relationships. So, and in every sphere of life, in a way, your whole being is going through a metamorphosis really in the next year and a half. So Pisces, the question is, do you notice that shift in November? So they are all the signs. And I would really encourage you to get involved in this case study, really, and to know this itself, just to know that that's the shift. That's where the attention is going now for the next year and a half. It might be enough for you. You might want to just park it there. But if you would like to go a bit further with it and try and observe in November, use the month of November as a case study to see how has there been a shift, as subtle as it might be. Or there might be some obvious thing happening objectively in the world around you. Whatever it is, see if you can pull something out of this and get back to me. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below. If you would prefer, you can contact me at my website, timelineastrology.com. You'll see my email contact form. You can send that through, or you can email me at info@timelineastrology.com. Okay, I would love to hear from you. I hope you got something out of that, and I wish you all the best for the next year and a half in these nodal transits. And until next time.